Welcome to Comic Books and You. Today I have a bit of a cold, but we are going to talk about One Bad Day Catwoman, which is one of the multiple One Bad Day book. I would say it's closer to a book than a simple floppy that was released, basically following a bad day in the life of various Batman villain. Currently, I have One Bad Day Catwoman, One Bad Day Bane available, and I should be getting most of the others in the course of coming week. So this is obviously a Catwoman story. This is Selyna Kyle version 632, 9641. Don't ask me. There's more version of Catwoman than there are of any other villain in the pantheon of DC. She always is represented as a cat burglar, so at least there is that. That's a standard fare. And in this case, it's more of the raven-haired vixen than the blonde bombshell or anything of the like. Maybe a little bit closer to the more recent the Batman movie, which I really didn't like. What we get in this story is that she grew up poor with her mom and her sister. That's a new one to me. I never really saw that for that character. Absent dad as well. More than likely, it doesn't look all that good, and I'm not sure it makes the character more interesting. Throughout the story, she's being positioned as stealing from the haves to give to the have-nots, so a bit of a Robin Hood kind of character. So she also has a sister who works as a cashier in some random grocery store. I'm not sure where that's coming from either. Does it make the character more interesting? Maybe. Honestly, it doesn't affect this story a whole lot. And her sister doesn't quite look like her, but genetics are genetics. Things can get weird sometimes. Our villain would be the Forger, which is an older woman who creates fake pieces of jewelry to trick auctioneers and the rich to spend more money than they should on it. That's about what we get in this story. What we also get is that she's extremely physically strong and a superior fighter, but we don't have any clear explanation for this in this number, and it doesn't quite make sense for an older woman to be a strong fighter, osteoporosis being what it is. She claims to be on the same side as Catwoman, so probably another one trying to get back at the rich, I guess. A bit confusing because we actually don't really know what side Catwoman really is, except for herself. And I would be honest here, if I were Catwoman, I would look up the word aposematism to figure out that a 60-year-old woman with dyed purple hair probably is not the most trustworthy person to deal with. We do see Batman in this story more or less as an incidental character. He is investigating the Forger at the same time as Catwoman, and Catwoman pushes ahead without his help or without following his advice. Still a bit of a doting dope, truly in love with Catwoman, and Catwoman being madly in love with him. So, yeah, I'm not sure why they're not married yet. I mean, they've been together for the longest time at this point, haven't they? We're going to go through the story fairly quickly because it is a fairly simple story overall. Catwoman wants to steal a brooch back that her mother had pawned off in her youth. The way it happened is her mom said it was a family antique, brought it to a pawn shop, and the pawn store owner looked at it and said, like, yeah, it's a decent looking piece, but it's not a real one, so I can't give you a big amount for it. And now apparently it is in the Treasures of Mid-Century France exposition, and she wants to steal it back from there. She bypasses a few guards on a rooftop, then starts fitting in by putting a fairly good looking robe de soirée. And she meets, well, the Forger, which we don't know who it is at the point, which explains the origin of the brooch, which actually, well, we'll see what happens there. Bruce Wayne is in the attendance for this auction, and Selyna catches his eye, so she quickly goes through the kitchen, disguises herself as a waitress, bumps into an auction preparation room, and steals the jewel by causing a bit of a commotion. Afterwards, Catwoman goes to a fence to try to verify how much the actual brooch is worth, but the fence looks at it and says, well, it's a fake. Just like the pawn store owner had said earlier. Selyna goes into a rage, thinking everybody's lying to her, but she then realizes that the woman she was talking to at the auction and had pimped up the value of the brooch probably lied to her as well. Catwoman stalks the woman and tries to find out where she lives and what happens. She's interrupted by Batman and tells her she should let it go and he should take the lead because he is investigating her and he needs a few more days to get all the clues and all the evidence he needs. Selyna doesn't listen to him and gets into a fight with the forger, who beats her up pretty badly. Once again, I have issues here unless the forger is forging her face. 60-year-old plus woman versus a woman that is physically fit. Like I said, osteoporosis is a thing in older women. After the fight, Catwoman nurses a black eye and decide to have a talk with her sister to explain how things are going, and she is probably going to go out with Bruce Wayne in the evening. So, as I said, it's a pretty simple story with actually a few layers underneath as well. I went quickly over it, so we'd have more time to talk about other things. But it's not an awful story on its own. There are things that could have been tighter, there are things that could have been better. We'll look into it. The cover for the one I've got, I think it's the standard cover. I think it's the standard cover for this particular edition. It's a bit of a mix of a basic cover and a pinup cover. We've got Batman Shadow in the back with Catwoman and the brooch. So it's not awful, not horrible either. I think it's a bit weaker than other One Bad Day covers that I've seen. The Ra's al Ghul one looked really cool. The Riddler one was okay. The Bane one was pretty good as well. Mostly because there's a lack of color here. We've got flesh tone, we've got black. That's about it. Nothing that quickly attracts the eye. And while Catwoman is good looking, on there it's not the best possible pose or the best possible look. A bit boring, in my opinion, as far as the cover goes. The cover for this is a bit different from other regular DC comics. So it's a bit different from either your standard or your premium floppy. It's a cardboard cover. It's not a true art cover or anything fancy, but it looks like it's a better quality cover than most other comics out there. That's what I would probably like that standard comics nowadays would have as far as cover goes, for a mix of being better protected and just a bit more easy to carry. Unfortunately, the binding itself for the book is not that great. I mean, you say you crack open a book, but in this case, it's literally you crack it open because when you open, you hear it crack. I'm not sure how it will end up. I'm not sure how the binding is done. It's clearly not a high quality binding like you would get in French bande dessinée. Oh well. Paper quality is a little bit higher than our standard comic as well. Welcome edition, probably what you should be using on most of your comics, once again. And we have no ads whatsoever in this particular book. Seeing how most ads in current DC products are non financially affecting, you know, sending money from the right pocket to the left pocket, it's probably what most of your books should look like nowadays. The color palette is fairly vibrant and deep, a bit more entertaining than other Batman titles where everything is, well, black and more black. It attracts the eye pretty well, but there are scenes that are darker, and at least it doesn't overtake the rest of the comic. Character designs and the characters themselves are generally pretty nice. You can make a good distinction between your primary characters and even our background characters. And you've actually got a decent amount of diversity in the characters. And it's not forced like you have in some other places. It actually looks like a standard North American town. You'd have a little bit of everything. And it looks very nice in that regards. Background work is very good. Enhances the story pretty well in the fence's office here on the right. It looks like a standard criminal fence office, but it does look pretty good overall in terms of the depth of the image itself with the background. Facial expressions, however, are fairly weak, not because they're not expressive, but because they are too realistic. We discussed this a little bit when we were talking about Vengeance of Bane, where you have the difference between truly caricatural and photorealistic. Here, they really try to go to that more photorealistic kind of thing, and it doesn't work. It'll give you your Selyna Kyle at the top. She doesn't look like she looks in other places in the book on that particular face, and the expression doesn't look good at all. In the fight with the Forger here with this particular panel, the facial expression on the Forger, she doesn't look like a woman anymore. That's very much of an issue. It's an issue in general, I would say, with women in there. They try to go photorealistic or more realistic for a lot of the look, and it doesn't work as well as they think it would. Here we have that protester yelling "parasite" at the GCPD. It's exaggerated, but not exaggerated enough or not realistic enough. So it falls into the holes between the different categories. Here it doesn't look like it should. So the character designs and the characters themselves are good looking, but once you start looking at the faces, especially when they're supposed to be have a lot of expression on them, that's when you start losing it. The fight between Catwoman and the Forger is really good. It's well paced and well separated in panels. Unfortunately, we also get one of those action scenes with freeze frames that we have right here. I never like those type of action scene. In my opinion, it looks lazy. So you only have to draw your background and a few of your characters once rather than for the number of times you wouldn't need it. And once again, the facial expressions on this one are not what they should be or not as good as they should be. So this particular scene I am not a huge fan of. I understand why it's there, but you could probably have split that up into multiple panels and it would have looked better. There's the panel where Catwoman runs through the kitchen. I feel it's rather weak because, it's Catwoman. She should have cat-like grace. She should not bump into anyone or anything like that. She should just be swimming through that kitchen with nobody barely looking at her or barely noticing her. Of course, that might be a gripe once again, but I think it's an important one. Story elements, there's a lot of things in there to talk about, and some of it is really good, some of it is somewhat bad. Overall, let's say here it's not a bad book. It is a book that I would recommend anybody that would want to read a Catwoman story or just dive a little bit into Batman to read. What we have here is basically Catwoman is tricked by the Forger because she's blinded by her own past. And here we really have that here. Basically, we have a piece of family jewelry that was sold to her mother by the Forger to try to pass it off as something that would be worth more money than it is. It's a little bit of an interesting take here. We also have Batman pointing out that he would need more time to get the Forger arrested, and Catwoman is completely blinded by her personal dislike of the person now, leading to that. So we really have a case of never mix business with pleasure, or feelings are for amateurs. Catwoman is way too close to the whole situation, and that's what actually causes her to falter in this story. Where we have some issues, well, it's a lot of background things. Let's just go through it. We have that huge affordable housing protest at the start where Selyna melds into the crowd in order to get where she wants to go. They're living in Gotham City. Affordable housing is the least of your worries. You're living in a city where there's a guy called Killer Croc who lives in your sewer. If your housing is really affordable, you're not going to be able to get the security required to protect you against a guy called Killer Croc. We get the regular police brutality, which you always get in those DC comics nowadays. But at least in this case, the first guy who get police brutalized was going to throw a rock at the cop, calling them parasites. They're the GCPD. They're doing a bang up job. I mean, the city is still standing. Okay, that's a very good start for Gotham. And I mean, if you're going to throw rock at GCPD, I would expect them to take care of business at that point. The problem is, of course, they push it a little bit too far with the cops being brutal to people who haven't done anything. Oh well, let's not get into that too much. DC has a problem at the editor level for these kinds of things. The book is trying to make profiteers look really bad, from the pawn shop owner to the auctioneers to everybody in the middle. But in the end, the character who is the rightest from the start is that pawn shop owner. The guy gets an half decent brooch from someone who is desperate for money, and he actually goes, "Well, yeah, I'm going to give you what you need to cover for your rent, but I can't give you more than that because it's not worth more than that." And that's what it's supposed to be. We can't say that the guy's a profiteer because in the end, he did what he needed to do based on what we have. And I would say that guy is probably a genius because most pawn shop owner, if you show up with a 14 carats brooch saying that it's from a specific house in Paris, they're not going to look too much into it and they're going to, well, try to screw you over. That's for sure. That's what pawn shop owners do. But to what level? We have a discussion between two security guards, one pointing out that people don't want to work for things anymore, and the other saying, well, the boss are not working and they make more than us. Once again, you're in Gotham City. If you say that someone like Commissioner Gordon's not working, you are completely delusional. I have a feeling that the people at DC or the editors don't realize what they're saying, but that's what it ends up being. This kind of messaging really only works if everybody involved believes in the eat the rich narrative. But in the end, at least 50% of the US population doesn't believe in eat the rich. And even amongst the other 50% of the population, you have multiple chunks who do not believe that, either because they are the rich or because they're starting to realize that they are being pushed in a specific direction. Also, something fairly minor, but that's just me. Why is that jewel not cat related? It's Catwoman. Should be a cat brooch or something along those lines. Now, here we are going to go on a little bit of a tangent. Catwoman and Batman. One of the arguments that we keep hearing or we keep seeing is if Batman was happy, he wouldn't be Batman anymore. And that's why they called off the wedding between Catwoman and Batman, etc., etc. This whole story arc destroyed the confidence in DC, Batman, and Tom King. It alienated a large number of stores and an extremely large number of readers. The thing is, this is basically a ship that's been around since the 1960s Batman show. It might date from a little bit earlier, but that's where it really took life. And it's a thing that's been repeated in the animated series, in the Batman Return movie, etc. Batman and Catwoman being part time lovers, and sometimes more than that. Let's face it, Batman does have a fairly interesting romantic life if he wanted to, but it always ends up going back to Catwoman. We even have the whole Art of Ush series that is basically 100% revolving around that. At this point, they need to either pull the trigger and the old soap opera thing with the love affairs, or pull the trigger in the other direction and break it off, and the two characters be completely separate. You have to do it or don't do it. If they're still madly in love, resolve it, have them get married, get a family, move forward with that. Yes, she'll be the stepmom of Damian Wayne and the adoptive mom of Dick Grayson, etc. But it's weird, but it's how it is. Batman is not a character which lives in tragedy and sadness. That's what his villains represent and what his villains are. Bane, Mr. Freeze, Two-Face, they're all characters who have Tragedy and sadness pushed on them, and their way for them to fight against it is to want to destroy society. And Batman, that's not who he is. He has one life altering tragedy in his youth. Then, when he's a little bit older, Jason Todd gets killed. Then he comes back. So, is it really a tragedy? I mean, it's DC. People come back from the dead all the time. If they're not meant to be together, if you don't want this to be keep going, just stop the whole thing. Have Bruce move on. There's a ton of interesting characters he has chemistry with, Zatanna as an example. And he could form a new strong family or a new strong environment, which would improve him and improve Gotham in the same time. We don't want the Dark Knight Returns ending for Bruce Wayne. He deserves better at this point in history. This is not a bad story, but I find it weaker than One Bad Day Bane. It's less of a character piece and just the start of a story of a rivalry between Catwoman and the Forger. The social justice element here are not very well applied. They're there because someone said they needed to be there, basically. And like I said here, the evil pawn shop owner was right all along. So do we really need to look at him in a bad light? I have no idea if this story is going to be continued anywhere. That's where it gets very difficult to follow when you have Batman, Catwoman, Punchline, Nightwing, Bad Girls, Birds of Prey, Bad Girl without the S, Detective Comics. That's why the format we have for American comics right now is having an issue. We would need to have a more specific and a more direct storyline. Where should we read for this? Well, there should be one Batman title. And if you have multiple stories in the Batman title, well, you'll still have only one Batman title and release 4 comics a month with the Batman title in it and move each of your story forwards from there. We'll look at One Bad Day Bane soon. Keep on reading comics, keep on enjoying them. I'll keep analyzing them, and I'll see you all later. Bye bye.